So, first off, a shocker for many of us in CDL Dallas this past weekend. If you got a chance to watch it, feel free to let me know your thoughts. Obviously, here in the live chat, wherever you may be joining us from, whenever live stream. At the same time, you can also feel free to let us know that as well on Twitter, right? If you're watching the show a little bit later, feel free, interact, use the hashtag off the break. Let us know your thoughts about CDL Dallas. But the big shocker for many of us, right, was in fact the grand final and the ability for who was there. Florida and the Rocker in the grand final. Not many, if any at all, predicted for either of these two teams to make it here, right? Dallas Empire, Chicago Huntsmen, nowhere to be seen. Definitely a surprise for me, as I expected to see the Guerrillas having more of an outburst in comparison to the Mutineers. Obviously, the Mutineers, they start to rise. They kind of carry on, progress forward in a very impressive manner, considering, kind of how young this lineup is, how soon it has been since Pharaoh has really kind of joined the starting lineup. But nonetheless, right, Florida puts on a show as they take down Guerrillas 3-1, Ultra in the rematch 3-1, Chicago 3-1, and in the grand finals, the Rocker 3-1. For me, the overwhelming key to success for the Florida lineup and for the one that made the grand finals back in Atlanta is domination, right? They go 4-1 on the weekend. When they look good, their domination is always fantastic. In their series, if they won the game one hardpoint, they always won the domination, right? They always kind of have that game three that they can rely on, right? If they didn't, they close out the search and destroy. So like I said, let me lay this out. In their series, if they won the game one, they won the domination. If they didn't, in the one outlier, they always closed out the search and destroy. They always could rely on coming into game three either up 2-0 or at a 1-1 score line, and they have that game three to give them the edge. It is the swing game mode, and that is what they rely on to close out many of their victories, so much so that is what pretty much, in my eyes, was a huge opportunity that progressed them and got them over the edge. They always closed out as well. Something to keep in mind. Off of that domination, it also provided a little bit of a boost heading into the rest of the series, so much so that the Mutineers always closed out a game for hardpoint in somewhat usual dominant fashion. Very, very impressive for the Mutineers to be able to do what they did, especially considering the teams that they faced off against. Getting back to the game for hardpoint thing, their opponents only averaged 158 points in game 4 hardpoint. Considering those teams include Rocker, Huntsman, Ultra, and Guerrillas, is incredibly impressive, right? That game 4 hardpoint, they were consistently dominating teams after the domination. It was a game 3 and game 4 swing. A lot of the times they relied on game 1. And obviously, a lot of the time as well, had the chance to close out the search and destroy. Florida, not typically an amazing search and destroy team. However, in their last 2 series, managed to get an off pick in Piccadilly. For those who got to watch the videos, I was trying to tweet about it as much as I possibly could. I love the idea that they were going to Piccadilly in kind of rather in these last 2 matchups that they had. Not typically a strong search and destroy team, but when they got Piccadilly, they managed to help make that role for them. That was the game that they kind of relied on, a particular map that they relied on, and it kind of helped them get through a few of their series. Now, these guys in particular looked excellent in the respawns primarily, right? They looked fine-tuned. They looked well prepared, and the guy that I mentioned watching, or rather that we were supposed to watch heading into the online league from Florida, was Pharaoh. And boy, did he make a massive impact on this team. Now, the reason why I didn't choose Mox, because that was kind of a hot commodity. A lot of people said, got to watch out for Mox, got to see how he translates, got to see how he plays. That wasn't the guy for me, because if we're going to expect to see someone like Mox be raised up, it isn't going to be on his own accord, right? That isn't how this works, right? You rely on your stars, and typically the team succeeds if 3 players are succeeding. If 3 players are playing well, the 2 others usually playing pretty well also. It doesn't work the same way that regular sports does, where it's like, hey, if one guy's hot, hey, it's great. No, the entire team at the same time also feels that because they're getting in those same engagements. So I didn't feel like Mox was the guy for me. I thought that it'd be Pharaoh because he was the person who I thought could make the overwhelming difference. And clearly, based on the way that they played, it seemed to be the case. Like I said, I think that the Florida Mutineers really catered off the way that he looked. He's the guy that's going to cause pretty much all the tides to really turn. That's going to be the impact player that they rely on, not just for this past event, but as well for future events. Given the current meta, I like Pharaoh a lot for that reason. Pharaoh was the consistent slayer that Florida needed, right? He put up a 1.24 overall. Skies no longer has to be the only one to carry a majority of the weight. He puts up a 1.21 in hardpoint. Granted, not a great search and destroy KD, 0.95. Obviously, like we talked about it, not amazing. What were the Mutineers really in search and destroy, despite a few of their victories that they had? And to go along with that, Pharaoh, domination, great game mode for this particular team. He finishes off with a 1.44 in domination. Shout out, by the way, to EasyMac for all these stats, as always. Really, this is the only person that kind of does it. Not the only person that does it, but I think the person who does it the best. Make sure to check him out. But Pharaoh as well. Also, for those who have tracked this stat, and I'm going to go and label it out, Pharaoh had a 63.9% true engagement success rate. Now, that stat basically means that if anyone ever shot at Pharaoh in domination, 63.9% of the time, that person that shot is dead by either Pharaoh or by one of Pharaoh's teammates. And what's crazy to go along with a very, very, very high percentage in this particular game mode and category, what's crazy is that Mox and Skies were also around the lower 63% of that as well. And that is perfect trading out of the Mutineers, which Dom was their strong suit, and that stat goes to show it there. So, with all these stats and figures, right, that we're bringing up, all the numbers that we're talking about, from what we saw at CDL Dallas, realistically, can we expect this again? Right? I mean, can we expect the same result to happen from the Florida Mutineers? Can we expect Florida to be a contender for the future of the CDL, right? Do they have what it takes to win another championship this season? The way that I want to go about this isn't simply by just thinking yes or no. I want to look at the schedule that they actually have in front of them to really get this answer. I want to look at the schedule. I don't want to just assume, oh, well, Pharaoh played pretty well. If we see Havoc kind of play the same way that he did, the rotation man, whatever it may be. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to take a look at the schedule and see, is it realistically possible that they are a consistent contender for the remainder of the year? So let's go ahead and take a look at the remainder of the season that the Florida team, in terms of their schedule, has. So I'm not going to read these off for you. First home series coming up is going to be Chicago. They don't play there. So that's kind of a positive, right? You're not worried about Chicago. You're not worried about Dallas. You're not worried about Atlanta. All three of those teams are going to be there. Chicago, you're cool to miss that one because of how difficult it's absolutely going to be. You could argue based off momentum, hey, maybe they want to play. I think with all three of those teams there, it's not going to be a fun sight. It's not going to be fun for anybody who has to face off against all three of those teams, especially Atlanta. Next one, their home series, Florida. They'll be in a group with Minnesota, Toronto, and New York. We'll see how New York plays. We could say that we like their chances to get out of that one along with Minnesota. If they make it out of groups, they then have the opportunity to play Paris, London, OGLA, or FaZe. A lot of middle pack teams, right? Paris, London, OGLA, who knows where they're at, but the overwhelming force is FaZe. I'm not sure how they fare versus FaZe, but I don't think that it's likely, especially over a long period of time. So I personally will X out the Florida home series. Despite it being on their home turf, that probably will be their best opportunity if they ever want to beat FaZe, for it to be then and there. Next one, Seattle home series, don't play, right? That's kind of unfortunate for them because there actually could be a huge opportunity if they were in Group A in Seattle, because that group is filled with London, LAG, Seattle, New York, some middle of the pack teams that are struggling right now. They probably could have easily made it out of that. And at the very least, they face off against Chicago in the finals, a team that they have a good history against, as they're currently 2-0 versus the Huntsmen. So if they're in Seattle, there's a great opportunity right there, but they're not going to be there. Next one, Minnesota home series, play Chicago first round. You could say, hey, that's great, depending on the way that you look at it, longevity, but also have to worry about Toronto and LAG. I like their chances of getting out of that group and at least the second seed, as that was the story in Dallas as well, facing off against two other rosters that are obviously off that roster change, Toronto and LAG. Same story here. On the other side of the bracket, they'll have to face off against 2 out of the 3. Dallas, Minnesota, Atlanta. Take your pick right now, especially between Dallas and Minnesota. But I probably Atlanta, right? Atlanta, probably along with Dallas or Minnesota. I like Florida, but I don't see them making it past 2 out of these 3 teams, especially if one of them is Atlanta. I X out the Minnesota home series. Next one, Paris. Play Paris first round. They'll have London and Dallas on the other side of the bracket. If they beat either Paris or London, they should be good to at least make it into the second seed, to make it then to the bracket stage. Now, if they do make it out in the second seed, which is very possible, they'll most likely play against FaZe first round. If they make it out in the first seed, they'll have to play them at least in the finals. It is hard to give Florida a continual edge, especially versus the Atlanta FaZe. I think I X out Paris as well. Next one, London home series. This is their ticket. All right, this is their chance. This is the Florida Mutineers' opportunity to get a victory here. They face off against OGLA first round. Later, either London or Seattle. In the bracket play, the only team that they have to worry about, and we'll see how Dallas progresses, but it's going to be the Empire. That's the only team that they really have to actually worry about. I think outside of OGLA, which, like I said, who knows their progression, but as of right now, if we see that same Florida play, you maybe like them versus Dallas, depending on who you are, depending on the day, this could be their chance. I like their possibility in London. Granted, it is one of the last events of the season. And the final one, Toronto home series. This will be one of the roughest groups of the year for them. In their group, they'll have to deal with Atlanta, Minnesota, and Dallas. If they can manage to escape it out of this group, they'll also have to worry about Chicago later on. And they may have to face off against one of the other teams that gets out of this group in terms of seeds. I don't like their chances in Toronto. So that's the way that the rest of the season shapes up for the Florida Mutineers. You have a constant Atlanta FaZe circling around you. Granted, at times you have opportunities, right? At times you have certain moments. I think the only event that they actually have a really good chance of maybe coming out with, depending on how they look on that day, unless we see some major upsets occur where Atlanta gets taken out, Dallas gets taken out, Chicago gets taken out, which is possible. But I think realistically, we're talking about London here, which is very far down the timeline. There could be multiple roster changes by then, and I'm just saying with the Florida, but other teams that could change things up a ton to really make these results a little bit different. But the question remains, do they have the capability to win more? Based on the way that they looked in Dallas, you're darn right they do, right? Based on the way that they looked in Dallas, they looked fantastic. They looked unbelievably great. But this is a team that by all accounts previously has been labeled and will be continued to be labeled as, until further notice, an inconsistent group until they show us more depth over time. So will they continue to be a threat? I think there's a very real chance of that. I do. I think they have a very good chance of being a threat over time. But a real championship contender that's constantly in the grand finals, I can't say that yet. I can't, in my mind, get myself to the point where I'm thinking, yes, Florida Mutineers will make it into multiple grand finals. They will have multiple times of chances of which they are going to be crowned champions based on their schedule. They may be in the grand finals from time to time, but to be a real contender, I don't know. I don't think that I'm there yet. I don't see that, at least yet. I don't think you can easily say that based on the small sample size. And what they did was no easy feat. But I've been saying this since the start of last year, or rather at the start of this year, excuse me, but kind of in terms of seasons, you get my point. This is a highly competitive league. I need 2, if not 3 events of same results to bank fully on whether or not a team is actually dropping or they're rising. And now with online events more than ever, We need more results. We need more of something to look at in order to assess properly. Based on the way that the Mutineers looked, that was the team, I think, at their best. I think that was them at their very highest potential. And don't get me wrong, I'm still holding on to see if they can make that last. But in my eyes, they shape up to be a wild card team that sits around the top 5 region, occasionally making some deep runs. That's where I stand right now with Florida. Like I need to see more. I want to see more. I think there's some great potential there, but at least as of right now, I don't think that I have seen enough yet. I don't think that we have seen enough out of Florida. Granted, previous grand final appearance, they make a grand final appearance here and now. A lot of people want to put them kind of maybe in the higher position of their top 2. Don't hate that, but for me, I personally, that is very, I tend to not really move too much when it comes down to my top 4, top 5, top 6. I want to see some consistency before I do that. I like this group. I think they looked excellent. If that is even a taste of what is to come, I think that it's exciting. But at least for right now, I don't put them there yet. I don't put them in that constant position of making multiple grand finals, having a chance to win multiple titles for the future. As I expressed, I think looking ahead right now, London may be their one and only target, but we'll see.